The Chief of Defence Staff has shown that he is willing to sacrifice the entire military and their families under his command for political gain. From a financial perspective, the cost to the Canadian taxpayer is estimated to be at least $3 billion in lost training, experience, and expertise. Plus, there have been significant administrative costs to implement the mandate and its consequences.
Have you been following the National Citizens Inquiry? It's a citizen-led commission which investigates Canada's COVID response, and it is traveling across the country. The commission examines the abuses of civil liberties inflicted on Canadians under the auspices of public health. It also deals with the health ramifications of forcing people to take an experimental injection as a prophylactic against unemployment rather than illness. The commission is also looking at the economic and social carnage inflicted on society thanks to these COVID restrictions. Now, I think one of the most underreported stories of the pandemic and the vaccine mandate which flowed from the pandemic has been the impact on the operational readiness of the Canadian military. Now, last week, I was in Red Deer at one of these NCI hearings where I heard expert testimony from Catherine Christensen. She's a former nurse, now a lawyer, who uses her expertise and her passion to provide legal services to members of the CAF. And I caught up with her after she got off the stand at the NCI. Take a listen.
Institutionally, the Canadian Armed Forces have lost people. Thousands of people are pouring out of the service since 2020, and they are not being replaced by new recruits. Where few recruits do join, who's left to train them? It isn't generals and admirals who train the ranks. It's the non-commissioned officers and the junior officers, and their ranks have been essentially wiped out. Some of the finest battle-experienced members were driven out of the Canadian Armed Forces when they need them the most. The media has covered the gutted state of our military ranks, where even the best soundbite from the defense officials cannot hide the sad state of our military.
Catherine Christensen, you just gave expert legal testimony here at the National Citizens Inquiry. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got involved, because I think you have a pretty unique story being a nurse and then a lawyer.
Right. In fact, I'm probably one of the few lawyers that do what I do in the country, if not the only lawyer doing what I do. I was a registered nurse, ended up hurt and going to law school, and became a lawyer. And I chose in law school after taking military law to represent military members and veterans as my career. I was told I was crazy. There was no need for it. They didn't need specialized representation. I ignored all that and hung my own shingle as soon as I was called to the bar. And I have been swamped with clients ever since. In October 2021, I was approached by hundreds of members who saw the first directive come out from the Chief of Defence Staff, and were looking for a way to address it. How could they fight this? How could they challenge it? What were their legal options? And they had been turned down by other lawyers in ways that were very unprofessional, in my opinion, and very derogatory. And when I started to hear the stories, they broke my heart. And so I thought, okay, let's do this fight. Setting up these men and women to be guinea pigs for an experimental medical treatment and then hiding the damage from it would be a war crime if it was done to prisoners of war. It certainly was a war crime in World War II. Yet General Eyre did it to his own people, and he thinks he's untouchable to answer for it. A military with leaders who see themselves above the law is a dangerous thing. History teaches us that, and it's a lesson not to be forgotten. And this experiment has gone wrong. A weakened military, already suffering from not enough people in the ranks, then lost thousands more to the mandate and likely thousands more to come who were permanently damaged from the injections. The count will only rise as time moves forward.
You know, that was one of the things that was very difficult for me to listen to, outside of, how the vaccine mandates came down, but the extreme bullying and coercion that our battle-ready military members and our battle-tested military members were subject to from their own chain of command. Their own superiors were doing this to them, but also their peers who were sort of tripping on power a little bit. Tell us some of those stories. There's one about a pregnant woman that I found very appalling.
Right. So some of our pregnant, now there is a policy in the Canadian Armed Forces to not vaccinate pregnant members with any vaccine, let alone one that had never been tested on pregnant women. And they went through some of the worst bullying. One of them was pursued at her home. She ended up hiding in the garage to avoid, because she's like, what do I do? They keep showing up. They keep harassing me, wanting to take me for these injections. I don't want them. And I finally said to her, well, call me if I'm available. You can be on the phone with me while they're there, or just don't answer the door, because she's not required to do that if she's not on duty. I had another pregnant woman was put into the hospital by her obstetrician and was charged. They threatened to charge her with AWOL because they said she was just trying to avoid the vaccination campaign. Then I had a woman who was, she had 1 day to go and her C-section was booked the next week. And they were trying to force her to take the second injection before she left, and she'd had a negative reaction to the first one. Blood clots, which in a pregnant woman can kill her. Having been a registered nurse before, 22 years, I was a critical care and labor and delivery nurse. So when she told me that, I knew exactly what she was talking about, and that, yeah, they could have killed her and her baby with a second injection. And she's like, what do I do? I said, can you avoid them for the next 24 hours? And then you're on leave and they have to leave you alone. They can't force you to do anything once you're on leave. Remedial measures or punishments were being handed out before accommodation requests could be applied for or granted. There was no intention to allow for religious or medical reasons to not take the injections. The right to refuse did not exist in the Canadian Armed Forces according to the chain of command. By the time Directive 3 came out just over a year later in 2022, the carnage and inconsistencies were blatant. Make no mistake, Directive 3 did not remove the mandate from the Canadian Armed Forces. The mandate still exists, even as the rest of the world's militaries have been removing their mandates.
It's just astounding. You also told a story of a Catholic priest, a chaplain. You know, one of the things I've heard from some of the members of the military is that the chaplain service really failed them when it came to military exemptions. And then when you had a good chaplain, a Catholic chaplain, he was told that his religious exemption wasn't sincere enough. I think it's pretty sincere when you take a vow of poverty and chastity, but for the military,
uniform on.
But for the military brass, it wasn't enough.
No. In fact, he's now been told that he's no longer in the chaplain service. So I don't know if it technically qualifies as defrocked, but in my mind, they basically defrocked him for standing up for himself and for others. And I know lots of chaplains who were perfectly willing to, or approved accommodation requests, and then the chain of command said no. And our case law from the Supreme Court of Canada is very clear on what qualifies as religious belief or personal belief to be accommodated. And the Canadian Armed Forces steamrolled right over the top of it. The chain of command can order troops into situations potentially fatal or have life-changing risks. That is without question. However, the presence of COVID-19 was not one of a deadly battle of bullets and missiles against an enemy on a battlefield. The members of the Canadian Armed Forces were at very low risk from the virus, as demonstrated, for example, by their service in high outbreak environments like nursing homes with 0 Canadian Armed Forces fatalities. To date, there has been no COVID-19 death in the Canadian Armed Forces.
One thing you also testify to, which makes perfect sense when you think about it, but you don't really think about it, is that the rate of vaccine injury is higher in the military because of their age, because young men are the ones who are being, who are receiving the vaccine injuries when it comes to the more common ones like myocarditis. But they also all received Moderna, which is the one that was specifically eventually recommended against that age group.
Yeah, when the mandate first came out, they weren't allowing them to have any other kind. They had to take the Moderna. And we all know now, and they would have known then, about all the adverse reactions they were getting from the Moderna injections, because they had a very distinct group of people with shared characteristics. It was an ideal test group. Right. That really shouldn't have happened, because I believe that previous chiefs of defense staff who seemed to be removed very quickly when they didn't bring in mandates, that was one of their concerns. What if there's something wrong and we wipe out our entire military with this? Right. And we kind of did. The true damage to the Canadian Armed Forces has come from the injections themselves, the consequences of an experimental gene therapy, and the mandate. COVID-19 did not decimate the Canadian Armed Forces. The leadership did it from within. What has been the cost of COVID-19 mandates on the Canadian Armed Forces? I could quote you the statistics that the Government of Canada would like you to have. To say those are inaccurate is a diplomatic evasion from the reality.
You said that somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000, so that's 10% of the operationally ready force, has left or are vaccine injured or quietly quit, I guess, take early retirement because you've lost trust in the institution. I want to ask you, as somebody who works with these men, what do you think this means for the future of the force? I'm concerned about the future of all of our institutions, academia, the military, policing, healthcare, because all the free thinkers, the people we normally put in positions of management, those were the ones kicked out.
Yes. I don't think it bodes well for our military. I think, and it's showing because they're not recruiting like they used to. Yeah. Edmonton was one of the prime places to recruit big, strong prairie boys and girls to serve in our armed forces. And the video that I showed, do those look like people who are overweight, not pulling their load in the military? No, these are people in the prime physical condition, battle-hardened, ready to go, completely voluntarily serving Canada. We're intending to stay there for their entire careers, that we're told you're not good enough. You're morally weak. You're the equivalent of a drug addict who won't reform, an alcoholic that won't quit drinking, someone who sexually assaulted someone, or a domestic violence abuser. Those are all given the same category of release as these people were given. And there's repercussions for that. There were people in the chain of command who still were telling them it was a dishonorable discharge, even though technically it's still honorable.
So I'm not going to talk specifics about this one case, but I will tell you we have absolutely no time for those that do not hold the values of the Army and the Canadian Armed Forces and the values of Canada close to their heart. So the values of diversity, inclusion, respect for others, teamwork, that's who Canada is. That's who we are protecting. And those that do not embrace those values, those that do not protect those values, have no place in this organization. So when we find out that there is a case, we act decisively. We don't act rashly, because another one of our values is respect for the rule of law, and due process is part of that.
Tell us a little bit more about how people can support the work that you do, because you're one of just a handful of lawyers who cared about the civil liberties of the men and women who serve this country. Mm-hmm.
So in order to take on the government, which is very expensive.
Yeah, we know.
I talked to an American lawyer who does the same thing, and he recommended that he set up a nonprofit, and he said, do it that way. You can take donations, and this way you can challenge the government without worrying about that side of it. And so I created Valour Legal Action Center, which is a nonprofit, and it's valourlegalactioncenter.org, and the Valour and the center are spelled Canadian, which drives American lawyers I talk to crazy, but we do accept donations, and all the money goes to helping with challenges to the government, because we've got a chain of command that says that the law doesn't apply, and I don't agree with that. So I'm looking forward to them having to answer under oath and in a courtroom. Years of service gone, benefits gone, pensions gone or reduced, injured members denied earned benefits of a medical release, denied unemployment insurance benefits, and blocked from some forms of employment due to the release category of 5F. The true cost in dollars may never be fully known.
Well, Catherine, I wish you the best of luck, and I thank you so much for the hard work that you are doing on behalf of the men and women who are
not able to have a voice in this because they are legally obligated to not question the chain of command. So you're their voice, and I think you're doing right by them.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an honor to represent this group of people. As I said in my testimony, I trust my life with any one of them. They're outstanding people, and they deserve a voice.
Rebel News has been covering the NCI since its inception. We even had a journalist, Tamara Ugolini, testify about the impact of the pandemic restrictions on her family at the NCI. I covered it in Red Deer. We have many written stories about the NCI on our website, and Drea Humphrey will be covering the NCI as it gets to Vancouver. To stay caught up with all of our journalism, be sure to be checking at rebelnews.com. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. If you'd like to see the real story of what happened inside Canada's Freedom Convoy, the single largest human rights demonstration in our lifetimes, might I suggest you head over to theconvoybook.com, where you can order a copy of Hold the Line, my story from the heart of the Freedom Convoy, written by my friend, convoy organizer Tamara Leach. Again, it's theconvoybook.com.